Three companies control everything you touch: your food, your money, your job, your future. And you've never even heard their names. That's not an accident. Because while the world argues about politics, billionaires, celebrities, and CEOs, the real power sits in the shadows, quietly owning the corporations that shape your daily life. And once you see how deep their influence goes, you will never look at the economy the same way again. This isn't a conspiracy. This isn't speculation. This isn't guesswork. This is the documented framework of modern capitalism, and almost no one knows it exists. Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover the companies you thought were rivals, Coke and Pepsi, Apple and Samsung, Amazon and Walmart, aren't rivals at all. They're puppets controlled by the same three hands, competing in public while cooperating in private. That's the world you live in right now. And those three hands belong to BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Together, they oversee more than $20 trillion. That's more money than most governments could ever dream of controlling. These firms don't just influence markets, they shape them. They don't just participate in capitalism, they architect it. They are the invisible empire behind the brands you buy, the companies you work for, the news you read, and the future you think you control. But here's the terrifying twist. You helped build this empire without realizing it. Every retirement contribution, every pension payment, every deposit into a 401k or index fund strengthen the grip these institutions have on the world. This is not a takeover. This is a quiet surrender, engineered by convenience, automation, and trust. To understand how three investment firms became the most powerful financial cartel in history, you have to go back to the beginning, back to when the stock market was chaotic, unpredictable, and accessible only to the wealthy. For decades, investing wasn't a hobby. It was a profession. The average person didn't know how to pick stocks or read financial statements. They didn't have access to analysts or research tools. The stock market wasn't a path to prosperity. It was a casino designed for insiders. Then something revolutionary happened: the invention of the index fund. It sounded simple, too simple. Instead of trying to predict which companies would win or lose, what if you just bought a little piece of everything? No experts, no guesswork, just automatic diversification. It was low risk, low cost, and shockingly effective. Returns became predictable. Volatility smoothed out. Ordinary people suddenly had access to the same opportunities as the wealthy, without the complexity. And people loved it. Retirement funds adopted it. Pension systems embraced it. Financial advisors recommended it. Governments encouraged it. The entire investing world gradually shifted from active decision-making to passive automation. Billions of dollars became trillions, flowing silently into index funds managed by the same small group of institutions: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. They didn't rise by brute force. They didn't win by advertising. They didn't run flashy campaigns or public stunts. They rose because people trusted them to hold their money and never realized how much power that trust created. The shift was subtle, but massive. As trillions poured into index funds, these firms became the largest shareholders of nearly every major public company in the United States. Not because they wanted to control the world, but because they were simply holding assets on behalf of millions of investors. But ownership is ownership. And in the corporate world, ownership means power. A company could have thousands, even millions, of shareholders. But when decisions are made, when votes are cast, when boards are chosen, when strategies are approved, only one thing matters: who owns the biggest block of shares? And guess who owns those blocks? The same three institutions again and again across almost every industry on Earth. This is where the illusion of competition starts to crumble. You think Pepsi competes fiercely with Coca-Cola, but their top shareholders are identical. You think Apple is battling Samsung, but the same institutions own giant chunks of both companies. Airlines that compete on price share the same owners. Oil companies that compete on supply share the same owners. Tech companies that compete on innovation share the same owners. When the same three entities own the entire playing field, the game isn't real competition anymore. It's coordinated stability. Corporations stop behaving like independent actors and start behaving like branches of the same superorganism. CEOs stop chasing risk and start chasing predictability. Decisions stop happening in boardrooms and start happening in the offices of the institutions that control the votes. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street don't need to run these companies. They simply need to vote. Vote on board members. Vote on executive compensation. Vote on mergers. Vote on political spending. Vote on strategic direction. Their influence is subtle, polite, disguised as guidance. But guidance from the owner is not guidance, it's instruction. Imagine a company wants to innovate, to take a big risk, create a new product, expand aggressively. Risk means volatility. Volatility means lower short-term returns. And the big three don't like volatility, so they nudge. They recommend. They suggest the company should stay the course, reduce risk, maintain stability. And just like that, innovation dies. Not from incompetence, not from lack of talent, but from ownership pressure. This is the quiet force suffocating dynamism across the entire economy. Companies that once fought each other now mirror each other. Products look the same, prices rise in tandem. Customer service collapses. Companies aren't trying to beat each other. They're trying not to disturb their shareholders. And the largest shareholder almost always sits in BlackRock's offices. But the story gets even deeper and stranger. Because while these three companies own huge portions of corporate America, the money they control doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you and every other person with a retirement plan. The institutions vote your shares, make decisions with your capital, and influence the world on your behalf without ever asking what you want. You think you're saving for retirement. You're actually voting for a financial empire. And that empire runs on something even more powerful than ownership: data. BlackRock built a system called Aladdin, a super-intelligent financial operating system that monitors everything happening in the global economy. It tracks trillions of dollars in assets, analyzes millions of data points in real time, and predicts market behavior with terrifying accuracy. Banks use it, corporations use it, governments use it. Aladdin has become the brain behind modern finance, and BlackRock controls the brain. It's not science fiction. It's not exaggeration. It's the secret infrastructure of the world economy. And it is almost entirely invisible to the public. Aladdin knows what companies are likely to fail. It knows which industries are shifting. It knows where capital will flow before it flows. It knows how markets react to elections, wars, natural disasters, interest rate changes, and social trends. Imagine being the only player in the casino who sees the cards before everyone else. That's the advantage Aladdin gives BlackRock. But information is only half of the equation. The other half is influence. When you own a piece of everything, you want stability. You want predictability. You want slow, consistent growth. And that incentive structure is now imprinted across the entire corporate universe. It's why wages stagnate. It's why prices rise. It's why competition dies. It's why industries consolidate into a handful of mega companies. It's why innovation slows down every year. No CEO wants to upset the institutions that can fire them with a single shareholder vote. And that's exactly what BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street can do. Fire CEOs, install board members, redirect strategies, approve mergers that eliminate competition, punish companies that take risks, reward those that fall in line. This is not capitalism. This is feudalism disguised as finance. You never voted for these people. You never approved their power. You never even heard their names until now. But they influence everything, from the prices you pay, to the choices you have, to the information you consume, even the media companies reporting on the economy. Check their shareholders. Same three companies. When you realize this, the world suddenly makes sense in a way that feels deeply uncomfortable. Industries behave the same because they are owned by the same. Prices move the same because they are set by the same. Politicians sound the same because they are funded by the same. Everything in your life is downstream of ownership, and ownership has consolidated into a triangle of silent power. And that brings us to the most important turning point in the entire story. These institutions don't just own the corporate world, they own the consequences. When housing prices exploded, guess who was buying single-family homes? BlackRock. When grocery prices soared, guess who owned the supply chains? Vanguard. When pharmaceutical companies raised prices, guess who held the voting power? State Street. When banks took reckless risks, guess who profited from the bailouts? All three. The public suffers. Corporations report record profits. And the cartel grows stronger. Because every crisis, every recession, every panic, every downturn pushes more money into safe index funds. The worse things get for the average citizen, the more power flows to the institutions controlling their savings. That's the structure of modern capitalism, a system where instability makes the rulers stronger, and now you're starting to see the full picture. This isn't about three companies stealing power. This is about a world that accidentally handed it to them. A world built on passive investing, automated contributions, and financial dependence. A world where ownership is invisible, decisions are centralized, and influence flows to whoever controls the most shares, not the most ideas, not the most innovation, not the most talent. The system didn't fail. The system worked exactly as designed. And it designed a cartel. A cartel that controls the economy, a cartel that influences governments, a cartel that shapes your future, a cartel you didn't even know existed until right now. And this is where the story stops being a financial puzzle and becomes something far more personal. Because once you understand who owns the economy, the next question becomes unavoidable. What are they doing with that power? The answer is simple. They're shaping the world into the version that benefits them the most. And because they own everything, they don't need permission. They don't need public approval. They don't need transparency. They only need control. And they already have that. When three companies collectively own large stakes in nearly every major corporation, competition becomes a myth. Innovation becomes optional. Prices become coordinated. Market crashes become opportunities. And ordinary people become passengers sitting in the back of a vehicle driven by institutions they can't see and leaders they can't vote for. Let's start with something everyone understands: prices. Why does everything feel more expensive? Why do groceries cost more? Why does rent skyrocket? Why does healthcare drain your bank account? Why does college cost as much as a house? We've been told it's inflation. We've been told it's supply chain issues. We've been told it's labor shortages. But the truth is much simpler. When the same shareholders sit on top of every major company in an industry, competition dies and prices rise in lockstep. Think about grocery stores: Kroger, Walmart, Target, Albertsons. They look like competitors. They brand themselves as competitors. They advertise as competitors. But pull up their ownership filings and you'll see the same three names on top of all of them. When ownership is the same, behavior trends toward the same outcome: higher margins, lower risk, less experimentation, higher prices. Every major grocery chain follows the same playbook because their largest shareholders reward consistency, not competition. Now look at housing. You think the reason homes are unaffordable is because of millennials buying too many lattes or because people don't want to work anymore. But while the public argues about lifestyle choices, BlackRock has been buying neighborhoods, entire neighborhoods, not because they want homes, but because they want assets. Stable, rent-producing, inflation-protected assets. When corporations buy houses, regular families lose bidding wars. First-time buyers get priced out. Rent rises. Home ownership becomes a privilege, not a milestone. Then there's healthcare. Hospitals consolidate. Insurance companies merge. Pharmaceutical firms raise prices in unison. Generics disappear. Patents last longer than they used to. And the same three institutions sit on top of all of them. When your owners prefer profit over competition, everything becomes a money machine, even your life. People complain about airline prices too. They say companies nickel and dime passengers. They say customer service is terrible. They say flying feels worse every year. But it's not because airlines are incompetent. It's because they're owned by the same shareholders. Competing for customers is expensive. Mistreating customers is profitable. And when the biggest shareholders own every airline in the sky, there's no incentive to improve the experience. This isn't an accident. This is structural, predictable, inevitable. Because when a small group of institutions own everything, the economy behaves like one massive organism, not thousands of competing companies. And that organism has one mission: protect itself, protect returns, protect capital. You see it in the job market too. Why do wages stagnate? Why do workers feel powerless? Why does every company seem to copy the same policies, the same benefits, the same layoffs, the same corporate culture? Because the same shareholders demand efficiency. Efficiency means lower wages. Efficiency means fewer benefits. Efficiency means squeezing more out of fewer employees. CEOs don't push these policies because they're evil. They push them because the shareholders who control their votes demand predictable margins. Companies optimize for shareholder satisfaction, not worker dignity. And the shareholders who matter most are always the same. Let's talk about government now, because people like to pretend politics is separate from finance. They talk about left versus right. They talk about Democrats versus Republicans. They talk about ideology, platforms, promises. But money doesn't care about ideology. Money cares about influence. And the institutions that own the corporate world also fund the political world. They donate, they lobby, they advise, they sit on committees, they meet with heads of state, they influence regulations that affect every corner of the economy. When politicians speak about helping the middle class, stabilizing the market, supporting small businesses, guess who quietly shapes the policies behind closed doors? The same entities that benefit when markets become more consolidated and more predictable. This isn't a conspiracy, it's an incentive structure. The politicians get stability, the corporations get profits, the institutions get control, and the public gets the illusion of choice. You hear people say, why doesn't the government break up big corporations anymore? When every major corporation shares the same owners, breaking them up doesn't change the ownership. If BlackRock owns 8% of Company A and 8% of Company B, and those companies merge or split, BlackRock still owns 8% of everything. Structural power doesn't change, only brand names do. This is why antitrust enforcement is dead. This is why industries keep consolidating. This is why every company feels like a clone of the next one. The government can break companies, but they can't break ownership. Now we arrive at the part people find hardest to accept, not because it isn't true, but because it feels too big to process. If BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street collectively own most of corporate America, who owns them? The short answer, no one, in a way that threatens their power. Vanguard is privately held by the funds it manages, an infinite loop of internal ownership that shields it from external pressure. BlackRock is publicly traded, but its shareholder base is fragmented across institutions that pose no threat to its leadership. State Street operates quietly, passively, invisibly, avoiding all attention. Together they form a structure no regulator can easily crack. Too big to challenge, too essential to disrupt, too intertwined to unwind. And that brings us to the next problem, accountability. Or rather, the complete absence of it. If Amazon mistreats workers, customers boycott. If a CEO makes a bad decision, shareholders revolt. If a politician fails, voters replace them. But who holds BlackRock accountable? Who votes out Vanguard? Who challenges State Street? No one. There is no mechanism. There is no oversight. There is no public voice, because the system wasn't built to contain them. The system was built to empower them. Let's take a step back and look at crisis moments. Crisis reveals power. Crisis shows who wins and who loses. Crisis exposes who the system serves. In 2008, millions lost their homes, but asset managers grew stronger. In 2020, small businesses collapsed, but markets hit record highs. During inflation, families struggled to afford groceries, but corporate profits broke records. Why? Because when you own everything, you profit from everything, even chaos. If the market falls, money flows into safe index funds. If the market rises, index funds grow even faster. If companies cut costs, shareholders benefit. If companies raise prices, shareholders benefit. If workers get squeezed, shareholders benefit. And guess who the largest shareholders are? The same three firms. This is why nothing ever changes. This is why problems repeat. This is why it feels like the economy is rigged. Because it is rigged. Not by individuals, not by politicians, not by conspiracy, by structure. And now we arrive at the most dangerous part of the story. The future. Because the concentration of ownership is not slowing down, it's accelerating. More people invest passively, more pension funds adopt automatic indexing, more retirement systems pour money into the same three institutions. Every year, the cartel grows. Every year, the moat deepens. Every year, the system becomes harder to unwind. Which means one thing, if nothing changes, the free market won't just weaken, it will disappear completely. Not through corruption, not through greed, through convenience. People invest passively because it's easy, because it works, because no one wants to pick stocks or gamble with their savings. Passive investing is safer, more predictable, but passive investing concentrates ownership. And concentrated ownership concentrates power. And that's the paradox at the heart of modern capitalism. The system that made investing accessible to ordinary people also created the largest, most powerful, least accountable financial cartel in human history. A cartel that doesn't need to break rules because it writes them. A cartel that doesn't need to lobby because politicians already listen. A cartel that doesn't need to advertise because you fund it automatically. A cartel that doesn't need to compete because it owns the competitors. People ask, is this dangerous? Is this sustainable? Is this legal? The answer to all three is yes. It is dangerous. It is sustainable. It is legal. Because danger grows when systems drift out of balance. Sustainability comes from incentives, not fairness. Legality comes from lawmakers who rely on the system. And here's the final twist, the twist that reframes everything you thought you understood about money, markets, and power. The three companies that control the world don't do it with wealth. They do it with trust. You trusted them with your retirement. Your employer trusted them with your 401k. Your government trusted them with pension funds. Corporations trusted them with investment. Their power is not money. Their power is stewardship, the ability to vote with assets they don't own, using influence no one can challenge. That is the ultimate loophole, the ultimate advantage, the ultimate shield, and the ultimate danger. Because when power is concentrated in a place that no one sees, no one can stop it. Not regulators, not voters, not CEOs, not consumers, not even markets. The free market didn't collapse, it didn't erode. It was quietly absorbed into three buildings that now control the destiny of the modern world. The next time you buy groceries, remember, the retailer, the distributor, the manufacturer, they all share the same owners. The next time you fill your gas tank, remember, the oil companies didn't decide the prices, their shareholders did. The next time you complain about healthcare costs, remember, the insurers, the hospitals, the drug companies, all answer to the same institutions. The next time you hear about layoffs, mergers, acquisitions, inflation, wage freezes, political gridlock, remember, the incentives all point upward to the same three names: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, the most powerful cartel in economic history, created not by corruption but by convenience. You weren't supposed to see it, but now you have. And once you know the truth, nothing about the world looks the same. Because the real puppet masters don't stand on stages, they don't campaign, they don't tweet, they don't debate, they don't blame. They just own, and through ownership, they rule. Welcome to the real economy, the empire behind the curtain, the invisible power structure shaping your life. And the part no one admits out loud is this: you helped build it. Not because you wanted to, not because you agreed with it, but because the system was designed so that you had no other choice. The greatest trick these institutions ever pulled wasn't hiding their power. It was making the world believe they had none.